Hey everybody, Rhino here, the world's strongest pro bodybuilder and inventor of the cooler, the world's only cooler that keeps 3 drinks all together inside one ice-cold container. Be sure to check out StanEfferding.com to get my new Signature Series Effing Shit Up shirt and my wife's new Mom Strong shirt. Sorry I've been MIA for so long, but I've been swamped since I appeared on Shark Tank. And I wanted to take you behind the scenes and share what really happens before and after the show airs, and hopefully help you discover the shark in you. As most of you already know, the Cooler and I, we aired on Shark Tank in February, and now we're partners with Damon John of FUBU. My Shark Tank adventure actually began over 2 years ago, before the Cooler was even on the market, when all I had was a prototype. I decided I was going to try out, so I went online to their website and I found that there was a live audition for Shark Tank right here in Las Vegas. So I grabbed my cooler and I went down and I stood in line. Now there's very little fanfare at these auditions, just hundreds of entrepreneurs, different stages in their business, vying for the same opportunity to get their idea or business on television. There were 4 tables at the front of a large conference room, and each was staffed by a Shark Tank representative. Hundreds of people lined up waiting for their opportunity. We were each allowed 1 minute to pitch our product, after which they may ask a quick question followed by a thank you and goodbye. And that's it. We were briefed before presenting that if we didn't hear back from them within a couple of weeks, that we wouldn't hear back at all. And only those who were selected to the next step would receive a call. They also said that if we didn't hear back from them, it was unlikely that attending another audition would yield a different result. And to help us put it all into perspective, they made sure to let us know that there were 40,000 people applying and only 120 would make it on the show. Now after that audition, my phone never rang. So I just kept plowing forward with the manufacturing and I brought the cooler to market. A year went by and I had established national distribution with Europa Sports, and I realized some success with retailers like 24 Hour Fitness, Vitamin Shop, and Bodybuilding.com. And I received a lot of positive feedback, and sales were growing both online and at the expos I attended all over the country. So fast forward to last fall, and now I had some sales and marketing in place, so I checked the Shark Tank website again, and there was another live audition in Vegas the following week. So once again, I grabbed my cooler and I went down and stood in line. The audition was much the same as before, hundreds of people standing in line waiting for their 1 minute pitch. Now this time I felt the pitch was much better and more enthusiastic, considering I had so much practice, and I was able to include some sales and marketing success. Now this time I did receive a call back, about a week after the audition, and I was told I'd be going through to the next round. Now this kicked off what would become a 10-week process, consisting of weekly requests for video submissions, personal background information and credit checks, signing releases and lengthy contracts and forms, business document requests like bank statements, financial information, business plans, income verifications, balance sheets. Each conference call, from the very first time that they contacted me, was prefaced by them stating that there was no guarantee I would be on the show, that they would be eliminating candidates throughout the process. Now, just to make sure I fully understood, they went so far as to say that there would be no time at which I would be assured I would be on the show. I could make it to the week before shooting and not be invited to the studio. I could be invited to the studio to practice my pitch for the Sharks or for the producers and not pitch to the Sharks the next day. I could pitch to the Sharks and possibly not be aired on television. And I could be given an air date and possibly get preempted or canceled. So the message was loud and clear. There were no guarantees. Now, even after 10 weeks of back and forth with the production team, I was preparing to be cut since I knew the dates were only a week away. It was a long 10 weeks of constantly second guessing whether or not the videos or questionnaires were good enough to convince the producers to bring me down to pre-pitch in person. Now 1 week before we began filming, I finally received a call from the producers inviting me to come down to Sony Studios to pitch to the staff. And it wasn't until that moment that I actually thought I had a chance to get on the show. All throughout the previous 10 weeks, I was just acting as if, but considering it a long shot. Now, I hung up the phone and I was excited for about 5 seconds, and then the reality hit me that I needed to step up my game in practice so I didn't choke on camera. Now, I've often said it's better to have tried and failed than to have failed to try. And I've also said that it's not failing if you learn something from the experience, And it just so happens that I've choked more than once before in similar circumstances. And this was my chance to apply what I learned from those experiences. Over 10 years ago, when I was developing real estate, I tried out for an open audition of The Apprentice, which was a group interview. Now that went well, so I was invited to a private interview. And that went well, so they invited me to meet with their producers for an on-camera audition. And I wasn't prepared, so I choked. A few years later, when I was competing in bodybuilding, I tried out for the American Gladiators. And I was ultimately invited to their studios in LA for an on-camera audition. And although I rehearsed for that, I didn't stick to the plan, which I talked about in a previous rant. And once again, I choked. So a couple years later, I began training with Flex Wheeler and Mark Bell. I became more exposed to workout videos and interviews and photo shoots and writing articles and making appearances and doing seminars and podcasts and going to expos. So now when people ask me how to get better at public speaking, my answer is I practice. I'll always be critical of my work, but I learn something from every experience. So how do I practice for the Sharks? Now, I had prepared and rehearsed my pitch many times, and I'd sent video of the pitch to Shark Tank, but I needed to closely replicate appearing on the show. When I was in college preparing for a bodybuilding show, my training partner and I would go to the drama school, and I would practice quarter turns and mandatories on a stage while he called out the poses. We would videotape the poses, watch the tape, critique it, and practice some more. When I was preparing for powerlifting meet, I'd train with the same equipment, same bars, same plates that I'd be using in a meet. Mark would record my lifts, critique my form, and I'd practice again. Now, to prepare for the Sharks, I watched the show and I wrote down all the questions that are commonly asked. Then I went to FedEx and I printed out large color pictures of each of the Sharks, and I set up a makeshift studio in my home. I set up cameras and I had my family sit in chairs holding the pictures in front of them. And I rehearsed the pitch, and I gave them a list of possible questions to ask me, and I practiced the responses. I watched the videos, critiqued the performance, and I practiced again. When the family wasn't available, I just taped the pictures to the wall, set up the camera, and practiced some more. Now, a week later, it was time for me to head down to Sony Studios, so I hitched a trailer to the Hummer, I loaded up my truck tire, borrowed Nick Best's strongman dumbbell, threw in my deadlift bar and weights, and I headed down to LA. Now, the first day, everyone does a practice pitch to the producers and staff. It's nothing glamorous, just a large, empty studio warehouse, concrete floors, and a flimsy curtain dividing the space in half. One side was the staff sitting behind a few rows of fold-out plastic chairs and tables with their laptops in front of them, while the rest of us stood on the other side of the curtain with our taped-off 4x6 square with our displays, waiting to pitch our product for 2 minutes. The practice pitch was high stakes. They made it clear that not everyone that pitches to the producers will pitch to the Sharks. So we all stood there nervously awaiting our turn to pitch. Turns out they wanted me to go first, so they called me up and I rolled my tire past the curtain. The staff helped me set up my display. And just as I got everything positioned, one of the producers stood up and walked over, and he told me he needed to move the tire over here and switch the dumbbell over there and move the deadlift. So everything was within the camera shoot. But when I originally set everything up to practice, I watched the show and I took pictures of each camera angle so I could decide how to best lay everything out. So when the producers suggested moving things around, I pulled out my phone and I showed them the camera angle that I'd be flipping the tire towards and how I thought that would be a good shot. Now, people who know me well know that I have the worst case of face blindness, and I can't remember faces and names for the life of me, which in this case was probably a good thing, because I didn't realize it at the time, but the producer that I was telling how to best set up the shot turned out to be Mark Burnett. Yeah, you know the guy. President of MGM Television, 10 Emmy Awards, executive producer of The Voice, Survivor, Celebrity Apprentice, and Shark Tank. That Mark Burnett. What can I say? He was in jeans and a t-shirt sitting at a plastic table. How the hell was I supposed to know? What I'll never forget was the look on his face when I was telling him how to set up the shot. And then a long, blank, incredulous stare followed by an unenthusiastic, okay. And then he turned around and sat down next to his 2 Emmys that he won the night before. So next thing I know, they say begin. And I started my pitch, and I lifted the 200-pound dumbbell, and I deadlifted the 600-pound bar, and then I flipped the 800-pound tire. And then as I began to describe the cooler, it dawned on me I hadn't practiced lifting and pitching at the same time. So as soon as I started describing the cooler, I was completely out of breath. Now, between the adrenaline and the lifting, I couldn't breathe and talk at the same time. So I was trying to take fast breaths, and my volume was trailing off at the end. But I just kept forcing out the words, and you know, I just been exhausted from, you know, the adrenaline dump. So fortunately I didn't pass out, and they liked the pitch, and they called me back to let me know I'd be going first thing in the morning at 7 a.m. So I practiced a few more times that night before bed, and I turned out the lights, and I closed my eyes, and yep, you guessed it, anxiety hit me like a freight train. So I stared at the ceiling all night while my mind raced around every detail of what lied ahead. I didn't get a wink of sleep all night, and I was already awake at 5 a.m. when the alarm went off. So I ate some breakfast, and I used half a bottle of Izine on the way to the studio. And despite all the self-imposed stress, I felt pretty good about the opportunity. I had plenty of practice, and the producers liked the pitch, and they were going to have me lead off in the morning. So I brought a few heavy power bands with me to help me warm up for the lifts. And although I didn't realize it at the time, looking back, it seems so obvious that it really helped me calm down and direct the blood into my muscles instead of my head. You could try all the meditation you want, but the best way by far to deal with stress is vigorous exercise. A few sets of 20 rep squats is amazing. So I was backstage deadlifting with the bands, doing banded step-ups and overhead presses for like 30 minutes before I got called into pitch. And there's some video on Shark Tank that shows me warming up just before they opened the doors to let me in. Now when the doors opened and I walked in and stood in front of the Sharks, the producers had told me before going in that when I reach the carpet, stand there for 30 seconds and don't say anything. Now it seems simple enough, but unless you try it sometime, just standing there for 30 seconds, staring at the Sharks, it feels like 30 minutes. So I'm guessing they used this time to check the cameras and get some close-ups, because while I was standing there, a boom cam was moving in and out across the room, and a camera operator wearing a body harness and a shoulder-mounted camera was walking back and forth in front of me, and we were instructed not to look in the cameras as they grazed by about a foot in front of my face. Now finally someone said begin, and I started my pitch. I assumed the Sharks would wait until I was done with my pitch before they say anything, but that's not what happened. No sooner did I lift the dumbbell, Damon asked me if it's real, and I told him it's real, and then he says, can I come lift it? Now there's an outtake video on Shark Tank's website on Facebook showing Damon coming up to lift the dumbbell, and he reaches down and grabs it, and it didn't budge, so he had to stand over it with both hands, and he tried to deadlift it, and he could only lift it a few inches off the ground before he dropped it. Damon said something about ripping his sack as he sat down. Now after I deadlifted the bar and I flipped the tire, only my half of the tire was on the rug. There was a rug down on the floor, and the concrete floor was under the other half. So as I lifted it, the rug started spinning up underneath my feet, and so I had to grab the tire and I had to step into it and curl it up and then try and push it over. So it looked like I was struggling just picking up the tire on stage. And unfortunately, while that happened, I tore the microphone off trying to flip the tire. Now the pitch went well other than that, but the hard part was the Q&A. When you watch the show at home, the Q&A is edited down to just a few minutes, but the actual Q&A lasts 30 to 40 minutes. Now even though the producers collected a lot of information about my business, they don't give any of that to the Sharks. The Sharks only knew my name when I walked out, so they asked everything they need to know about the business. Now after handing out samples, the questions began right away. Now it's just like you see on the show. The pace was fast. They talk at the same time as each other, and they hardly wait for an answer before they ask another question. They ask for specifics and they challenge your answers. They attack assumptions and predictions, and they voice their opinion. And they were talking to each other just as much as they were talking to me, and they were answering each other's questions and then follow up with a question of their own. There was no plan, there was no script, and there was no practice for any of us. It was freestyle. Now I didn't know what to expect, but the optimist in me had hoped there'd be an offer. Now I talked to Mr. Wonderful about a licensing opportunity, I talked to Mark Cuban about NCAA, NBA, and NFL branding, and I talked to Lori about QVC to reach out to soccer moms to get the kids sports market. Now the longer I stood there answering questions, the hotter it seemed to get under the studio lights, and the less I could feel my legs underneath me. I started thinking about something one of the producers told me backstage before I went out. He said, don't lock your knees. Apparently, people have passed out during the Q&A, so I started moving around and moving my arms while I was talking. But towards the end, I had a pretty good idea who was out. But I wasn't prepared for how fast that happens, and within 30 seconds, 4 sharks went out. And I was in panic mode trying to rescue a deal from Damon. Now, fortunately, Damon made an offer, and I accepted. And as I left the studio, one of the staff took me back to the trailers and asked me to wait to get checked out by the psychiatrist. And that was the first I'd heard of a psychiatrist, but it made sense, because I'd seen so many people on the show look like they got hit by a train. Many entrepreneurs that come on the show, they've spent many years and all their money. Some of them had moved in with their parents or mortgaged their home, and they leave the tank crying because they didn't get a deal. Now that's the reality of starting your own business. It's not glamorous. I've worked 7 days a week from dark to dark and been hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt more than once when starting businesses. Some people felt I gave up too much, or sold the company for too little, or that they'd give me what I wanted, or that I didn't need the money. But for me, it had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with marketing. Trying to buy that kind of exposure would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe taken years. Now, the asking price and the entire pitch, for that matter, with all the grunting and lifting and the tank top and the big guns comment, that was all intentionally for television as much as it was for a good business presentation. Now, I believe the deal is more for the getting on the TV show. Now, half the people who pitch the sharks don't even get a deal, and their business is still successful because it opens other doors. So there's a huge upside to reaching so many eyeballs. Now, over 10 million people watched that show all over the world. Over 2 million people shared it 10,000 times and made over 5,000 comments on Facebook alone. And it will air 10 times over the next 2 years between repeats and syndication. As a matter of fact, it's airing again on ABC in 2 weeks on June 23rd. The marketing power of Shark Tank is incredible. When I solicit retailers to sell my products, the first thing they ask me is, what's your marketing spend? They want to know what you're going to do to drive traffic to their store to sell your product. It's taking up space on their shelf, valuable space that other products could sell better than yours. Everyone wants to get their products in a store thinking the store will sell the product, but it doesn't work that way. Stores expect you to sell the product. They ask for an advertising spend, a display, appearances, giveaways, discounts, and deals. Mark Bell doesn't make money on Power Magazine or his podcast, and his seminars and gym memberships are both free. Much like a lot of popular people on social media, Mark uses his mediums mostly as a forum to reach a lot of people, and the income opportunity is in selling goods and services to that audience. It's marketing. The larger the audience, the more opportunity you have. Marketing's everything in business, and it has to be constant. It's like eating and training for bodybuilders. The most successful businesses constantly market every day, 365 days a year. So how has business been since appearing on Shark Tank? Well, we've all heard of the Oprah effect, where products that appear on her show sell out the next day, or her book of the month becomes a New York Times bestseller. Well, there's a Shark Tank effect as well. Many businesses explode in growth after airing on the show. In my case, the cooler had more sales in the 10 days following the show than it had the previous year. And more importantly, I started receiving inquiries from major retailers such as Bed Bath & Beyond, GNC, Walgreens, and major distributors in Canada, Australia, Malaysia, the UK, and South America. And they don't ask me what my marketing spend is, because they know the cooler will be on Shark Tank for the next 2 years. I'll be in 9 countries and 17 states this year promoting the cooler. And I have a new Cooler 2.0 arriving in 2 weeks with a keychain holder, removable protein powder cup, pill pockets, and many other upgrades, as well as a cooler caddy to hold your wallet and phone. Now, I've sold thousands of these to distributors all over the world before it's even manufactured. Now, that's the power of marketing. No matter what your idea is, it's only going to be as good and as successful as your ability to market it. It's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Fewer and fewer people will work for the same company for 30 years and retire with a pension like my dad did. You are an independent contractor for yourself in life, and I believe there's an entrepreneur inside most of us, and the only thing preventing you from pursuing your idea is you. Well, that's my rant, and as always, thanks for listening.